Welcome to Outbreak Brief, the podcast that takes you inside the world's most dangerous infection.
Thank you. It's great to be here to dig into this.
So today we are tracking a pathogen that hides in the jungle canopy. It literally turns the skin bright yellow and it makes its victims vomit black blood.
Yeah, it's a virus that humanity has fought for centuries, honestly.
Right, and yet it remains stubbornly impossible to eradicate. But before we get into the biology, let me just set a scene for you, the listener.
Go for it.
So look at the timeline between 1970 and 2015. There was this cohort of 11 travelers, people from the U.S. and Europe who went into endemic zones in West Africa and South America.
Right, just normal travelers.
Exactly. They all contracted this pathogen, and 8 of them died.
Which is just staggering when you think about it.
It really is, 8 out of 11. But here is the craziest part. Only one single traveler in that entire group had a documented vaccine history.
And let me guess, that was the sole survivor.
The only one.
I mean, that 72% mortality rate in that unvaccinated cohort is, well, it's a terrifying reality check.
It really proves this isn't just some disease of the distant past, not something confined to medical history books.
No, not at all. Our mission for this deep dive is to decode this virus for you. We're using the latest sources, the 2026 CDC Yellow Book, a massive WHO fact sheet, and clinical data from stat pearls.
So we can separate the myths from the actual medical reality.
Exactly, because between 2016 and 2018, there were these explosive outbreaks in Angola and Brazil. They completely caught the global health community off guard.
Just massive spikes in travel-associated cases, right?
Yeah, more than 37 unvaccinated travelers caught the virus during that window. It really exposed a dangerous complacency we have today.
Because we have this incredibly effective tool to stop it, yet what do the numbers say? Like 31,000 to 82,000 people still die from this every single year.
Every single year. It's a high-stakes gamble where ignoring the rules is literally deadly.
So, to understand how a disease with a known vaccine still claims tens of thousands of lives, we have to look at the villain itself. We are diving deep into the yellow fever virus.
And it is a formidable villain. It's a single-stranded RNA virus, and it belongs to the flavivirus genus.
Which means it's related to some other pretty nasty stuff, right?
Oh, yeah. That genetic family tree makes it a deadly cousin to West Nile, St. Louis encephalitis, and dengue.
But yellow fever is uniquely aggressive, in how it breaks down the human body. Okay, let's unpack this name.
The yellow part.
Yeah, because the yellow isn't just a superficial skin thing. When you dig into the clinical data, you realize the yellow skin is actually the visual result of, well, a catastrophic system failure.
That's a great way to put it. The virus specifically targets your hepatocytes. Those are your liver cells.
Okay.
It infiltrates them, uses their cellular machinery to replicate itself, and then it triggers apoptosis.
Which is cell death, right?
Right. It essentially forces the liver cells to self-destruct. So as your liver dies en masse, it completely loses its ability to filter the blood.
Wow. So the filtration system is just nuked.
Yeah, it's gone. And because of that, it can no longer process bilirubin.
And bilirubin that's a byproduct of blood breaking down.
Exactly. It's the toxic byproduct of your body recycling old red blood cells. Normally, your liver handles it, but now it just backs up into the bloodstream.
So the toxic waste is just flooding the system.
Flooding it completely. And that bilirubin eventually stains the patient's skin and the whites of their eyes, this deep, vivid yellow.
That profound jaundice.
Yes, it's a major red flag that the body's internal infrastructure is literally collapsing.
What's terrifying to me is that the virus isn't just destroying the host. I read it's basically using the host's body to stage its next attack.
Yeah, that's what makes it so different. With a lot of mosquito-borne diseases, humans are what we call dead-end hosts.
Meaning we get sick, but we don't pass it on.
Right. We don't brew enough virus in our blood for a new mosquito to bite us and catch it. But yellow fever, it turns the infected human into a walking biological weapon.
It's like turning our bloodstream into a hijacked viral server farm.
I love that analogy. We upload the virus in such massive quantities that any local mosquito tapping into the network instantly becomes a vector itself.
Which fuels an urban epidemic. So how did this even start? How does the virus survive in the wild?
It has this brilliant but terrifying evolutionary survival strategy. It uses 3 distinct transmission cycles.
Okay, what's the first one?
First is the sylvatic, or the jungle cycle. Deep in the forest canopy, the virus just circulates continuously. It bounces back and forth between non-human primates, so monkeys, and forest canopy mosquitoes.
Like specific mosquito species.
Yes, specifically the Haemogagus and Sabethus species. And it doesn't even need humans at all to survive there.
It's perfectly content just staying in the jungle, out of our way.
Exactly. But then there's a bridge, the intermediate or savanna cycle. We see this primarily in Africa.
How does that bridge work?
Well, you have these treehole breeding Aedes mosquitoes. They transfer the virus between the infected monkeys and humans who happen to be working or living right on the jungle borders.
Okay, so it makes the jump to humans.
Right. And once it has a human host, it launches the third phase, the urban cycle. This is the true nightmare scenario.
Because that's where the massive populations are.
Exactly. A viremic human, someone with huge viral levels in their blood, brings the infection out of the jungle and into a densely populated city.
Where domestic mosquitoes take over?
Yeah, domestic Aedes aegypti mosquitoes bite them and rapidly spread the virus from human to human, bypassing the monkeys completely.
I mean, it's like a military campaign. The virus uses the savanna mosquitoes to breach the perimeter and then deploys the urban mosquitoes to conquer the city.
That's exactly how it works.
But the tragic part is, humanity is essentially bringing this plague upon itself.
How do you mean?
Well, through deforestation and urbanization, we are tearing down the ecological walls between the deep jungle and the dense city. We're physically reintroducing this virus to millions of vulnerable people.
You're absolutely right. We're creating the perfect conditions for it. And once it jumps to humans, it moves incredibly fast.
Because it's completely vector-borne, right? It relies on the bite of those infected mosquitoes.
Correct. So say you get bitten. The incubation period is typically 3 to 6 days.
So for almost a week, you feel totally fine.
You feel completely fine while the virus is silently replicating inside you. And what's fascinating here is the massive viremia that occurs next.
The virus levels in the blood.
Right. It spikes just before the fever even hits, and it lasts for the first 3 to 5 days of the illness.
So during that window, you are walking around as that viral server farm, highly infectious to any mosquito that bites you.
Yes, the viral load is so extraordinarily high that we actually see rare non-mosquito transmission routes, which is unusual for this kind of pathogen.
Yeah, the sources mention some really dark anomalies there. There have been documented bloodborne and organ transplant transmissions.
Oh, absolutely.
Like in 2021, there was a case of transmission through an organ transplant that involved the live vaccine virus itself.
Yeah, that was a huge wake-up call for transplant protocols.
And even more tragic, there were 2 distinct cases of perinatal transmission. Infected mothers developed symptoms right around delivery and passed the wild-type virus directly to their newborns.
Which is just devastating.
Yeah, the data shows both infants died of fulminant yellow fever on their 12th and 19th days of life.
It just underscores how aggressive the virus is once it finds a vulnerable host.
So who is the most vulnerable? Where are the real danger zones today?
Geographically, it's highly concentrated. The virus is endemic to sub-Saharan Africa, that's across 27 countries, and tropical South America, covering 13 countries.
But when you look at the demographic data between those 2 continents, there's a really fascinating split in who actually gets sick.
Yeah, the contrast is stark.
Like in Africa, the virus is constantly circulating in that intermediate savanna cycle, right? So adults slowly build up natural immunity over their lifetimes.
Exactly. So in Africa, the unvaccinated infants and children end up being at the highest risk for severe disease.
But then you jump over to South America, and the victims are completely different. The casualties there are usually unimmunized young adult men.
Right, because of occupational exposure.
Yeah, they are the ones physically encroaching into the forested areas for logging or agriculture. They run headfirst into the sylvatic cycle.
It perfectly illustrates how local ecology and human behavior totally dictate the epidemiology of an outbreak.
Okay, I hear you on the risk in the deep jungle, but let me push back a little here. Let's play this out for a listener.
Sure.
Say I'm a tourist. I fly into a major city in Brazil or Kenya. I'm staying in a high-end modern hotel. Air conditioning is blasting. I'm definitely not out logging in the rainforest canopy.
Okay.
Am I actually in any real danger, or is this primarily an occupational hazard for locals?
You are absolutely in danger, and assuming otherwise is a fatal mistake for travelers.
Wait, really? Even in a modern hotel?
Yes. The sources highlight a critical concept called epidemiologic silence.
Epidemiologic silence, what does that mean?
It means that just because local health surveillance isn't actively reporting cases, it doesn't mean the risk is gone. Surveillance systems often miss low-level transmission.
Okay, but how does it get into the city?
Because of those urban Aedes aegypti mosquitoes? They breed in tiny pools of water around human dwellings like flower pots or gutters, and they can transmit the virus episodically even in the dry season.
So if just one infected mosquito gets into my high-end hotel room.
Exactly. Your risk of infection is very real, regardless of the air conditioning.
Wow. Okay, so let's walk through what happens when that bite actually takes hold. The sources state that a lot of people are actually asymptomatic.
Yeah, many people never know they had it.
But for the unlucky ones, the initial attack hits like a freight train. You get severe backache, intense chills, a pounding headache, nausea, and total prostration.
Total exhaustion. Patients describe feeling so weak they literally can barely move.
And during this acute phase, there's a bizarre clinical clue doctors look for, right? The Faggot sign.
Yes, the Faggot sign. It's a pulse fever dissociation. It's totally counterintuitive.
Because normally when your body temperature spikes with a fever, your heart rate speeds up to match it.
Right, that's your autonomic nervous system doing its job.
Yeah.
But with yellow fever, the patient's heart rate paradoxically drops, even as their fever is raging.
That is so weird. How is the virus scrambling those internal signals? Why would the heart slow down when the body is practically boiling over?
Well, we aren't 100% certain of the exact mechanism, but the leading medical theory suggests the virus is directly infiltrating the myocardium, the heart muscle itself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Or it's actively disrupting the autonomic nervous system. It's effectively hacking the body's internal pacemaker.
So it's actively fighting the body's survival responses. And then the true thriller aspect of this disease kicks in.
The remission phase.
Yeah. After a few days of this absolute misery, the patient often feels better. The fever breaks, the headaches fade. But this 24 to 48-hour period of remission is a complete trap, isn't it?
A deadly trap. Most people think they're cured.
Mm.
But following that brief remission, roughly 12 to 15% of patients plunge into the severe toxic phase.
And that's when everything falls apart.
The virus just decimates the liver, causing that deep jaundice we talked about. It begins destroying the kidneys, leading to acute renal failure. But the most horrifying mechanism is the massive hemorrhaging.
This brings us to the black vomit detail mentioned in the CDC Yellow Book. It sounds like some archaic term from an 18th century plague journal. What is biologically happening in the stomach to cause that?
Well, it all traces back to that constroyed liver. Your liver produces the vital proteins your blood needs to clot properly.
Okay, so without the liver.
When the liver shuts down, you develop severe coagulopathy. You completely lose the ability to clot. So the patient begins hemorrhaging internally, often bleeding heavily from the stomach lining.
Just bleeding directly into the stomach.
Right. That blood pools in the stomach, mixes with highly acidic gastric juices, and oxidizes. It turns into a dark, granular substance that looks a lot like coffee grounds.
And then the patient violently expels it.
Yes, that's the black vomit. And at this stage, multisystem organ failure and shock are setting in. The case fatality rate for patients who enter this toxic phase is a brutal 30 to 60%.
So if a patient's stomach is bleeding out, their kidneys are failing, and their heart's pacemaker is scrambled, what happens when they finally reach the ICU? I mean, is there any antiviral medication that can stop this cascade?
The grim reality is no. There are no specific antiviral medications for yellow fever.
Nothing. I thought I read about recent trials with a drug called sofosbuvir.
They did try sofosbuvir, which actually works wonders for hepatitis C, but the clinical data showed absolutely no improvement in yellow fever outcomes.
So what can a doctor actually do?
Treatment is strictly supportive. Doctors rely on intensive care, dialysis to replace the failing kidneys, and transfusions of fresh frozen plasma to try and restore the blood's ability to clot.
And the medical staff has to navigate a minefield just treating the basic symptoms, right? Like giving a patient a simple aspirin or an NSAID like ibuprofen is strictly forbidden.
Absolutely forbidden, because the patient is already suffering from severe coagulopathy. That inability to clot introducing an NSAID, which thins the blood, could trigger catastrophic, unstoppable hemorrhaging.
It's just a terrifying tightrope.
Yeah.
But there is another detail in the clinical protocols that stunned me. One of the very first things a hospital must do when a yellow fever patient arrives is put them under a mosquito net.
Yeah, the underlying logic there is fascinating from a public health perspective.
Because the net isn't there to protect the sick patient from bugs.
No, it is there to protect the local mosquitoes from the patient.
That is wild.
Remember that massive viremia we discussed? The high viral load in the blood? If a local uninfected mosquito manages to bite that patient in the ICU and then flies down the hall and bites a nurse or another patient in the waiting room.
The hospital itself becomes ground zero for a brand new urban cycle.
Exactly. You are literally containing a human biological weapon.
But if we can't cure it once the cascade starts, our entire survival really hinges on prevention. And the silver bullet here is the 17D vaccine.
It truly is.
Right.
It remains one of the most effective vaccines ever created. A single, standard dose provides lifelong immunity.
Lifelong, just from one shot.
Yep. For 99% of people, that immunity is locked in within 30 days of the injection. This is the vaccine documented by the famous International Certificate of Vaccination, commonly known as the Yellow Card.
Which many countries legally require for entry at the border.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Because it is a live attenuated vaccine, it carries some terrifying, albeit rare risks of its own.
It does. You are fundamentally introducing a replication-competent pathogen into your body.
The WHO data tracks two very specific adverse events, YELAND and YEL-AVD. Can you walk us through what those actually mean?
Sure. YELAND is a neurologic disease. In very rare instances, the weakened vaccine virus actually manages to cross the blood-brain barrier.
And what happens then?
It causes encephalitis, which is massive brain inflammation. But YEL-AVD is arguably worse. It is a viscerotropic disease.
Viscerotropic meaning it attacks the organs.
Exactly. For reasons that are often tied to the host's own immune system failing to suppress the attenuated virus, it proliferates wildly in the organs. It essentially mimics the wild-type virus.
So the vaccine ends up giving you the full-blown systemic disease.
It does. It causes multi-organ failure, and the fatality rate for YEL-AVD is staggering. It's around 43%.
Good Lord. Which forces doctors into a brutal risk calculus. The vaccine is strictly contraindicated, meaning you absolutely do not give it under any circumstances. To infants under 6 months, anyone with a thymus disorder, and the severely immunocompromised, like folks with advanced HIV.
Right, because their immune systems can't handle the live virus.
But how do doctors handle, say, older travelers who want to visit an endemic zone?
That requires deep, shared decision-making. For people over 60, the incidence of these deadly viscerotropic side effects jumps significantly.
So they can't just hand it out freely.
No, a doctor can't just give the vaccine to a 65-year-old tourist without weighing the true risk of exposure. They have to ask, are they going to a remote jungle lodge or just a coastal business meeting in a big modern conference center?
And if the risk of the vaccine is higher than the risk of the trip.
Sometimes, the safest medical decision is to issue a medical waiver for the yellow card and instruct the patient to rely entirely on rigorous mosquito avoidance.
Which exposes the fatal flaw in most people's mosquito prevention plans. We are conditioned to think of mosquitoes as a dusk and dawn problem.
Right, the evening biters.
But the primary urban vector for yellow fever, Aedes aegypti, is a daytime stalker. It feeds aggressively during the heat of the day. So if you are in an endemic area, there's literally no safe time to go outside without protection.
None at all. Your personal armor has to be flawless. That means utilizing EPA-registered repellents, specifically those containing DEET.
And what about clothing?
You need clothing treated with permethrin. Permethrin isn't just a repellent. It's an actual insecticide that chemically binds to the fabric of your clothes.
And it survives the wash.
Yeah, it survives multiple runs through the washing machine. It actively kills the mosquitoes when they land on the fabric.
And from a public health angle, environmental control is paramount. Aedes aegypti thrives in human environments. They breed in tiny, tiny pools of clean, standing water.
Even a bottle cap full of water is enough.
So prevention requires systematically removing their nurseries, emptying flower pots, turning over children's wading pools, and even drilling drainage holes in the bottoms of tire swings.
We need every single one of those preventive tools because when we pull back to the macro view, the global burden remains heavy. Today, we are still seeing an estimated 67,000 to 173,000 severe infections annually.
To combat those numbers, there's a massive global initiative spearheaded by the WHO, UNICEF, and Gavi. It's known as the IE strategy, Eliminate Yellow Fever Epidemics.
It's a comprehensive, decade-long plan.
Yeah. And with today's date being May 2026, we are actually in the final target year of this specific strategy. The goal has been to stop urban outbreaks before they start through massive mass vaccination campaigns and strict border screening.
And while the II strategy has undeniably improved urban preparedness and global surveillance, recent outbreaks provided a really harsh reality check.
Because of the vaccine shortages.
Exactly. Countries had to resort to fractional dosing, giving just 1/5 of a normal vaccine dose to stretch supplies.
Just to put out the immediate fire.
Right. While it provides temporary immunity to halt an outbreak, it highlights just how dangerously fragile our global vaccine stockpiles remain when a sudden urban epidemic ignites.
So looking to the future, it forces the ultimate public health question. Will we ever eradicate yellow fever the way humanity eradicated smallpox?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer is no, we won't.
Why not?
Smallpox only infected humans. But yellow fever has that sylvatic cycle we talked about. As long as there are non-human primates and forest canopy mosquitoes, the virus will always have a safe harbor.
So it's untouchable out there.
It will keep circulating deep in the jungle. And as long as deforestation continues, those spillover events into human populations are guaranteed to keep happening.
We can't wipe it off the earth, which leaves you, the listener, with a rather chilling thought to mull over. The clinical sources briefly touch on the risk of spillovers into entirely new territories.
In new continents, even.
Yeah. We are talking about regions like Europe and North America. Global climate change is steadily expanding the habitats of Aedes mosquitoes year by year, pushing them further and further north.
The vector is already establishing itself there.
Exactly. So what happens when a viremic traveler brings the urban cycle of yellow fever into the completely unvaccinated, totally naive populations in the cities of the Northern Hemisphere?
The population has zero immunity. All it takes is the introduction of the virus.
Are our medical systems, which have absolutely no cure and rely solely on supportive care, ready for a sudden outbreak of a disease that causes black vomit and multi-organ failure right in our own backyards?
It's a sobering question.
We have the vaccine. We know the mechanisms of how it spreads. The science is incredibly clear, but science only protects us if we maintain a healthy respect for the pathogen.
Because the walls between the deep jungle and the concrete city are disappearing a lot faster than we think.
Stay informed, stay prepared. This has been Outbreak Brief.